light within our hearts, light within our thoughts, light within our words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be. Welcome. I am Sister Who. With me today on the show, I have my friend Xenia Grant, and we wanted to talk about autism in relation to what we're calling geriatrics. That encompasses growing older with autism, being an elderly person and having autism, the issues for care and independence heading into old age. I think maybe to start this off, there seems to be an assumption that especially those who are more significantly affected by autism will always be dependent on someone. And as children and young adults, they may have parents and family there to help them. At some point, those people will be gone, presumably if they're older than the person with autism. And so, for example, a child that is significantly affected by autism, I have to wonder if the parents have to create a trust fund, or if the child really has anything to look forward to later in life other than being institutionalized. It seems to me there are a lot of more desirable creative solutions available.
And not only that, but especially those who are not, more on the higher functioning end, they, live a chunk of their lives wondering why they're different, and then at the age of 60, they find out this is why I've had trouble in X, Y, and Z. I'm 60 years old. I've been, navigating decade after decade after decade.
That's one of the things I forgot to mention, is that there are so many diagnoses that are being made after the person is already in their 50s and 60s. Their whole life has gone by. I mean, for myself, I can look back and tell you all the way back to early childhood, all the obvious signs, except that when I was a child, we didn't know all this about autism. And so they may be obvious now because of what we've learned, but they wouldn't have been obvious to anyone in the 1960s. You get to the middle or the latter half of life, the latter third of life, whatever, and suddenly they give you an explanation that says, oh, this is what's going on. Well, thank you for the explanation. Now what do we do? And at least in the United States, there aren't a whole lot of programs to address that.
Not only not a whole lot of programs to address it, but, there's not enough professionals to address it. There's not enough support groups. There's not enough...
even the professionals themselves don't know that much about it.
Yeah, at least in Britain, in the UK, they're acknowledging that you can be old and autistic.
And addressing the specific issues that combination creates.
Yeah, in the United States, I haven't heard a peep. And I remember when I was at the Autism Society of America conference in Kansas City in 1999, I started bringing up this issue. At the end of the 20th century, we're in the 21st century, and I still haven't really heard that much.
That was 15 years ago.
Yes.
At the time of this recording, in any case. And what have we done in the last 15 years? And most people would have to concede not a whole lot.
No, we need to acknowledge that, I've had people, come to me. I'm talking about what you call more the higher functioning. I 73 years old and I just found out, or,
Well, and whoever was a middle-aged person at the time that new avenue of research was suggested, they were middle-aged then. Now they are the elderly person who would be affected by that.
Yeah.
They've been waiting 15 years for some sort of response. Obviously, society needs to get up and give it to them, but in this discussion, I guess I'm hoping we can touch on insights and perspectives and things to consider as you do so.
And not only that, but, when people grow old, things start happening, arthritis or... and
additional levels of medical concerns.
Medical concerns, and different supports and all that. Regardless of what functioning level that person is on, because in the end, we all need to be interdependent on each other. And I think our society needs reminders of that.
Well, and also to be involved in taking care of each other.
Yes.
You know, that today you may be taking care of someone else, a few years in the future, someone else may be taking care of you.
Absolutely. And that, I mean, and I also read about, you know, let's say someone on the autism spectrum, let's say they're 50 and their parents are 70 or 80.
Mm-hmm.
And they haven't had, and these parents haven't had a day of respite since the end of World War II or the beginning of the Korean War.
Yeah. But additionally, I think there's a certain tendency for people to want to avoid talking about things that they fear or that they're uncomfortable with, or things that they really don't want to happen, even if those things are absolutely inevitable. I mean, it's kind of like people who refuse to write a will because they don't want to think about dying.
I mean, this is sort of germane to the topic. I was just reading a very interesting article about, you know, about translated English from the Russian, about how Russians, you know, giving Russians tip on American customs.
Okay.
And one of the things they said is that Americans really don't talk about anything that's bad. You know,
No, in general, there's a certain phobia about anything that might be perceived as discouraging or depressing or...
Yeah, and whereas from a Russian mind, it's, you know, suffering and hardship is to be expected.
It's normal to life. I guess I grew up in a farming community, and that was kind of the understanding we had there as well. But it was somewhere halfway between, because everyone understood that the work and the struggle were constants in life, but they still want to talk about them even while they were non-verbally recognizing them.
And, you know, with autism and geriatrics and all that, I mean, first of all, there needs to be acknowledgement that people over 50, over 65, over 75 exist and are on the spectrum and are living whatever lives that they are living. For those who need more supports, that also needs to be talked about, because institutions aren't the answer. How do you create supportive communities? Mm-hmm. What examples of supportive communities are out there that people don't normally think about?
Well, and if you know that some sort of difficult transition is coming, how do you prepare the autistic person to adapt to it? I mean, I've heard parents talking about wanting to take their autistic children to new places, and they'll show them photographs of where they're going and explain what's going to happen and what to expect. And when this person makes this gesture, this is how you should interpret it, because he won't tell you what he means. He'll expect you to know, mm-hmm. which I think is frustrating, but it happens all the time. Mm-hmm. You know, where they look at you and say, well, and you say, well, what? Well, you're supposed to know. Well, I don't. With all of that, if you're dealing with an autistic person whose parents are very elderly, somebody should be having conversations with that person as much as is possible, or by pictures or whatever, somehow communicating with that autistic person about finding a loved one gone. Absolutely,
and that needs to be talked about, because, you know, death does happen. Things, unforeseen events do happen, and the person with autism, regardless of functioning level, needs to be involved in that to the best of their abilities. I think that, you know, life will always throw us curveballs, and we need to expect that life is not going to be easy, that life is going to be, you know, a bumpy road.
Some of those curveballs are totally unavoidable.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
They're going to happen no matter what. Mm-hmm. So you can prepare and have them happen in the relatively best way possible, or you can leave yourself totally open and don't prepare at all and be on a collision course with a devastating experience.
Yeah,
I had a friend whose mother died of cancer. Mm-hmm. It took her a year to die of cancer. Mm-hmm. During that whole time, they did not get around to making any preparations for her estate or inheritance or anything. Mm-hmm. she died, the bank took the house, and he was homeless.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that's just one off-the-cuff example, but those are the sorts of things that need to be considered and need to be proactively addressed when one is the caretaker of a person with autism,
Mm-hmm.
or when one is a high-functioning autistic person entering old age.
Yeah, I mean, I remember, may his memory be eternal, Van Bruce McDonald, who died at the age of 73 in the year 2011. He was already making plans of when he's 80, when he's 90.
Okay.
I mean, and you know, and a lot of people, we do need to plan ahead. We do age. We do things change, whether health wise or situation wise or what have you.
Well, and at some point, I would think at least those with high functioning autism, and probably all the rest as well. I haven't communicated with the lower functioning autistics to find out, but if bridging to a different disability, if Stephen Hawking can be in a wheelchair, quadriplegic, almost unable to communicate except through a computer device, and still be able to compose brilliant textbooks on science, I don't know that we can assume that the low-functioning autistic isn't possibly understanding really profound spirituality.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I have read...
And in that, a main point of geriatrics is understanding that we are mortal. We will not be here forever. What do we want to leave behind?
Oh, and that...
If anything.
Absolutely. I mean, because mortality is a part of human existence, and I mean...
And geriatrics reminds us of its reality every day.
Absolutely, absolutely. My mother, may her memory be eternal, died last year at the age of 81.
Okay.
But we knew, and my whole family was preparing for this, and I come from a large family, thank God. But and of course, understanding what was going on, but
But the Orthodox Church to which you belong has rituals that address those
yes.
transitions?
Oh, yes. I mean, paraclesis, panahitas, remembering people at the 9th day of death, the 40th day of death, a year after their death. The Orthodox Church heavily, heavily prepares people for, the repose of a soul. I mean, we were just in the class I was in last night. That's one of the issues that was discussed was, the preparation of, those who, we in the Orthodox community say repose, falling asleep in the Lord. And the reason why is that death, every human being dies.
I'm wondering if maybe it's the blessing and the curse of the United States that by being this melting pot of so many diverse people, we don't really have any equivalent rituals for those sorts of things.
That's
the blessing of that is that means, or could mean, that we get to choose any variety we want out of the spectrum of possibilities of all our immigrants.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I do know that Catholics have a certain way of dealing with issues surrounding death. Jews do, Muslims do, Orthodox do. Many different religious traditions have ways of dealing with mortality. Our culture tends to shy away from that. And they try to prettify it. To
make it look nice and dress it up and whitewash it and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. Whereas, in the Orthodox Christian culture, I mean, we sing psalms. I mean, literally in front of the coffin in the church, 24 hours, someone is doing psalms. I mean, you have, you change shifts and you read psalms for the Psalter for 24 hours. There is a preparation period.
I think a lot of people have forgotten why that's important.
Yes.
But of course, geriatrics, in a way, I mean, it's an important area of study because we all have to go through it. But it seems because people don't like the idea of diminishing abilities and running out of time on Earth and so forth, that it's like we want to avoid even the recognition of it.
Yes, and whereas whatever faith tradition that person or autistic person is a part of, it is part of being human.
Well, and factoring into that is also the cultural or religious perspective of autism that becomes part of that process.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, whether they're regarded more or less equal to any other person in value or in emotional experience or something, or whether they've always been inconvenient and it's just actually nice that we can finally get this over with and sweep them out of the way.
Yeah, understood. I mean, it used to be, and when I read that the ancient Romans and the ancient Greeks, if the baby was born with disability, they just exposed the child and went away. Christianity changed.
You know, leaving it lying out on a hillside or something.
Yeah, Christianity changed that for the better, in my human opinion.
This is minimally related, but stumbled onto a news article on the internet of somebody abandoning a small dog that had been born deformed, you know, just for that reason. And somebody intervening and finding the dog before it died, thank goodness, and creating adaptive devices and all sorts of things in order, and saying, no, this is a very loving creature. It just doesn't have the usual configuration of legs.
Yeah.
Because it was born, you know, without certain limbs developed.
Yeah.
The reason I guess I would say that might be relevant is that if you are the caretaker or one of the caretakers of an autistic person, there may be systems that you can set up that, if they're well orchestrated and they're properly engineered, won't require you to remain present as much. The curious thing about that, which I think this is the whole caretaker realm is a big part of geriatrics.
Yeah.
Because it's not just what you go through.
It's what they go through.
It's what
too.
your caretakers go through also. Whether they're there, whether they're not, if parents have completely built their day-to-day life and their relationships around caring for an autistic person, and that autistic person suddenly develops independence, the parents will then have to adjust to finding new purpose in life.
Yeah.
Not measuring themselves by a role that is fading.
Yeah. And not only that, but I think another thing is with the support systems that you're speaking of, in that area of endeavor that people work in, there's a very high turnover rate because the pay's not that good.
The pay? Oh, the pay is not that good.
No.
Okay.
I worked in a group home for a year back in the late 90s, and
Okay.
it's really hard to find good people.
But for an autistic person, that would be twice as difficult because the autistic mind needs a certain constancy.
Absolutely, yeah.
We're surrounded by a myriad of details every moment, and it gets a little overwhelming. If the caretakers or the people on whom we depend are also changing frequently, we now have no persistent common anchor in our lives. I heard of some individuals last year who were being shuffled from home to home to home. So they didn't even have a constant environment in terms of their own bed and bedroom. Everything was constantly changing, and there was nothing to hang on to. I have to wonder if that is a big part of any geriatric struggle, that you have to brace yourself or prepare yourself or something for everything shifting. You know, this house you've been living in for 50 years will not be the last place you live in.
Yeah, I have a friend.
Things like that.
I have a very dear friend of mine, Margaret, whose father, at the age of 97, just died. And she's in Texas, and the funeral was on Monday. And her mother, who is 93 or 94, I mean, and they lived in separate nursing homes, but they've been married for 73 years. I mean, it is a big change. I mean, and these are people that have no disabilities whatsoever.
I find I cope with a lot of things in my daily life by creating a routine around them.
Yeah.
And I always do them exactly the same way every single time. Obviously, at some point, the world changes, and I have to reinvent the routines all over again. It would seem that if you're in the twilight years of life, so to speak, being able to make those changes would be far more difficult.
Oh, absolutely. It's harder when you're older with many things because your body isn't in its prime. I mean, when you're 87, your body isn't in its prime. Let's say when you're 18 or 48, and it's harder when things change because
Which would also dramatically affect employability.
Yes.
If you're in your early 50s and get laid off, and now you not only have to deal with ageism, trying to come up with enough employment to keep yourself from being homeless, you also have to deal with being autistic. And it would be that much more difficult to find an employer willing to take on both of those challenges instead of hiring some young person fresh out of college.
Yeah, and that is a difficulty when in of itself. Also, another thing that's difficult is when things change and the person, let's say the autistic person's been working at a blank job for many years and they have to retire. They become 65 or they got a back injury or what have you.
I mean, you can't work anymore, and you're already limited. What do you do with life? Human beings need to maintain a sense of purpose. Even or especially perhaps the autistic person needs to maintain a sense of purpose. Without a sense of purpose, you look in the mirror and all you see is baggage. You need, I want to make a contribution. Please let me do it.
Absolutely. I mean, and it's a way that the Creator created us, is to always have a purpose in life. No purpose, we're
no reason for living.
Yeah, we are made to have a purpose.
It makes me wonder if the rates of suicide, for example, are actually higher among autistic people.
I do not know, but I have read with geriatrics that I have read people who are extremely old who commit suicide. One time, a couple of years ago, I think I read about someone who was 102 or 104 that committed suicide. It's like, wow, a century old. And they committed suicide after living for 10 decades. And it's like, golly gee willikers. I mean,
well, for anyone, everyone likes to think that they're immune to these sorts of issues, but it really doesn't take much to take a totally healthy person and reduce them to a place where they can't find any purpose for living anymore. A motorcycle accident, a depletion of financial resources, it could be any number of things, and suddenly they're looking at the world in a way that they never had to look at the world before.
Or death of a loved one, or death of a child, or a grandchild, or myriad of other things.
Unmanageable grief.
Yeah. I once read a story about this old, this person who had family and all that, but this elderly person, wanted to get, she was from Vietnam and, wanted to get back to Vietnam. Because her sense of time and her sense of whatever has changed.
I guess to me, the most important thing above all, when the end does come, is that the person or creature, if it's a dog or a cat even, the most important thing is to surround them with love, because to me, that's what fuels the journey to the other side. And if they're not surrounded by love, it makes the journey out of this life so much more difficult.
And that's absolutely true. In the tradition that religious tradition I'm a part of, getting, quote unquote, use the expression, getting right with God, getting right with others, getting right with the universe.
Preparation for closure.
Getting right with the universe as a whole is extremely important.
But it's not just the individual doing it, it's the community around them, empowering them to do it.
Absolutely.
Which is why every time I've had a dog die or something like that, it becomes so important to me that they are surrounded with reminders of love during their final days.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
The other thing to throw in here about, especially in this day and age, I guess, about geriatrics and autism, is not to assume that an elderly person, autistic or not, is in fact without a life purpose. That the geriatrics is also about maintaining quality in life for as long as your later years shall last. That just because you retire doesn't mean life is over.
And not only that, but we live in a society that doesn't have as much respect for the elderly as other cultures do or did.
We don't have as much respect for elders, but we also don't prepare ourselves to be respectable elders.
That's an interesting take, and that is a totally different topic to talk about altogether, but
Yeah.
I just know that we as a culture need to respect those who have gone before us.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bridge that's built from both directions.
Oh.
On one hand, there needs to be respect. On the other hand, in many other cultures, people spend their whole lives learning how to be the wise elders to whom people will come with questions at some later point in life.
Oh, absolutely.
But most of us don't think of ourselves as being particularly wise, and don't expect to be put in a role where we will need to be wise, because they'll be looking at us saying, well, if you don't know, who does? I mean, if anybody should know, you should. And I don't mean to be putting unrealistic expectations on people, but I'm saying in especially tribal societies, people spend their entire lives growing into wise elders for the tribe.
We grow up, we grow old, and we grow into ourselves.
And it's always becoming, and it never stops.